God is only really a guru, a friend when you're in need. I mean, he wouldn't do anything like bugger around with Job to prove a point. And there's no one who can't play this game. There could be an afterlife and no God. Why not? There could be many gods and no afterlife. There could be a God with a sense of humor where good people went to hell and evil people... I'd like to be the first to rush to the common ground that's just been offered us, which consists of a very large, quite long admission that religion is man-made, which is our point of view. Thank you.
As unethical as anywhere else, and a part of that is the recognition that although we do not know, we hold to hopes that orient us and allow us to value each other as of abiding significance.
Which can be done by anyone who repudiates the supernatural. Look, I don't mind attacking religion at its best if you'd rather I do that. I mean, behind the idea of judgment, remember, which is part of the deal of the afterlife and the reward of heaven or hell, is some rough concept of justice, that there's an equalization of the odds against which we struggled when we were alive, that the tears are dried, and that the wrongdoing is punished. Very, very old wellspring of human aspiration. Why do the wicked prosper? I would really like to know. And why, as Hamlet says, so much contumely is heaped on the patient and the meek. Now, the reason why Sam's Oxonian friend disturbs us when he elaborates his theory is we don't like to think that we're just digitized by someone else's brain, that we're rats in some maze, someone else's maze. Nor, though, rather interestingly, do we like to think that everything that happens to us is random. We repudiate both ideas. They're both equally distressing. But the reason why I started with my totalitarian point is this. Take the case that I still can't get out of my mind. You remember reading about it, the woman in Austria who was kept in a cellar by her father for 30 years and raped every day and bore him children who he raped also. Picture how she must have prayed, how she must have wearied heaven with her prayers, and how accidental was her release that we even know about. You're told those tears will be dried, that'll be compensated. In other words, that has to mean her suffering was part of the plan. We let that happen. Yes, we did know. We do take responsibility. That was part of the design, but it'll be better later. I think that makes her suffering meaningless, and in fact rather obscene. We'll do that to her, but we'll make it up later on. Take another great Austrian, now deceased, born in Braunau on the Inn, and dead in May, I think, 1945. Yes, that was all part of the plan too, but believe me, we'll see to it that he's punished for it. Now, if you don't mind my saying so, Rabbi, that kind of thinking seems to me to materialize both the worst in the concept, the horrible idea of the human being as an experimental object in a design that's opaque to us, where we're played with, and to maximize the horror of randomness. Pick one Austrian, make him very nearly the ruler of the whole of Europe, another Austrian, and keep her as a prisoner of her rapist father for 3 decades. And that's all part of the plan too. So it's maximizing chaos, and it's maximizing tyranny and deliberate cruelty. And that's why I think reason has to repudiate this whole means of thinking. Reason and justice too, I should add.
As I'm sure it would if religion thought that way, but it doesn't. In fact, wait a minute. No, wait.
Dave, I'll give you your time here, please.
Okay.
That's the move that's really not open to you. If you want to change the subject to a truly purified wisdom tradition that is non-dogmatic, that's just open to mystery, you have to...
No, I'm not going to do that.
Okay, but if you want to follow the path...
You have to hear the move before you repudiate.
No, but I think you're taking the move that Bradley...
You think so, but I might not be.
Well, let me just tell you what I heard you do.
Okay,
you just said religion is not the way Christopher suggested it was, and in the vast majority of cases, it is. And so you have to at least admit that we're not caricaturing religion. 50% of Americans think they're going to see their pets in heaven. I mean, we're dealing with
heaven if you don't.
Right. We're having this conversation in the context of how religion is practiced.
Soon?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
There are strains of religion that are deterministic and say that everything that happens in the world is planned. There are. Calvinism, for example, does that. In Judaism, that's actually very rare. There are a couple of notable thinkers who say that, but almost no notable Jewish thinker believes that what happens here is preordained by God. And in fact, free will, and the free will to do horrendous things, is built into the system and is the prerequisite of the chance of human beings to both sin and also to do wonderful things. So when you say that God made this man do this, that's all part of the plan, and she's going to be rewarded in the afterlife for the horror that God inflicted on her here, I can, with all good conscience, say, look, I'm not going to speak for the pet envisioning Christians that you speak for, but I will speak certainly for my own tradition and say that that's not actually what Judaism believes. It's not what almost any major Jewish thinker says, and I wouldn't believe it if it did say that. So
okay,
that's
a great cafeteria to be shopping at. Take your pick.
What do you mean, take your pick? I just said that almost no major Jewish thinker says that, and if they did, I wouldn't agree with them.
Both of you, confronted with Sam's perfectly clear attribution of the words of the Rambam, you said, well, it's as likely that paradise is in the sages as the sages are in paradise.
I didn't say the Talmud did.
Yes, right, the Talmud. And your colleague says, Maimonides writes in order to be misunderstood, and it's deliberately, which is, by the way, I quite agree with the Straussian reading of him that says that that is so. But this is a guide to the perplexed. What you're saying is he wants to intensify perplexity.
Welcome to Judaism.
Yes. He also, look, when you say, for example,
you have this smorgasbord
let me give you a little sample of how Rambam thinks. When it says, for example, in Isaiah that the lion will lay down with the lamb, right? And you know Woody Allen's line that the lion will lay down with the lamb, but one of them won't get much sleep. So,
no, the lamb, actually.
So Rambam says this is not to be understood literally. It means big nations and small nations will dwell together in amity, and you should not think that the order of nature will be overturned. Now, I didn't invent that. It's right there. I can show it. It's the end of Malachim. It's the end of the code of law. And he has a sophisticated understanding of religion. If you say to me, are there people with an unsophisticated understanding of religion? I have no doubt that there are. I even know a few. But you're not sitting with them on a stage. And I don't think it's actually, I don't understand my task to be to defend understandings of religion that I don't adhere to. So I'm happy to argue with you what I understand about religion, but obviously, if I thought mainstream Christianity was the way to understand religion, I'd be a mainstream Christian. Right. And I'm not.
Hitchens is exposing a serious problem with religious thinking here. The idea that suffering is part of some divine plan and will be fixed in the afterlife ends up justifying real-world cruelty. If a woman is abused for decades and we're told it will all be made right later, that turns her suffering into something acceptable, even necessary. There's no scientific evidence for an afterlife balancing system. Neuroscience shows consciousness depends on the brain. When the brain stops, awareness stops. No memory, no experience, no continuation. Even the Bible contradicts the idea of fairness. Ecclesiastes 9:11 admits life isn't just or predictable. And in Job, suffering happens without explanation. So instead of fixing injustice, religion often explains it away. And that's exactly the problem.
I want to make 2 points in response. I just want to kind of show you all how the sausage of faith gets made. Or at least argued for. I see 2 problems with what you just did, and perhaps you're aware of them. One is that Maimonides actually said that this could not be understood allegorically or in any other way, but literally he came back 25 years later after he had been misunderstood in the Guide to the Perplexed and wrote, I think in his commentary to the Mishnah, that the resurrection is a literal truth, has to be believed in. There may be some caveats there in his theology, but he was talking about bodies being reanimated. The other issue is you made this sort of artful move to the free will loophole. You said people have free will. If a man wants to lock his daughter in a dungeon and have sex with her, God has allowed that because he's given us this rather diabolical freedom. That doesn't cover all of the other suffering for which only God can be responsible if he exists. The 9 million children I just talked about dying every year through cancers and violence and accidents and lack of access to clean water. And this is God's fault if God exists. I mean, either he can do nothing about this, or he doesn't care to. So either he's impotent or evil. I mean, this is the problem that the free will doesn't get you out of.
David and Brad, I wanted to pick up on that point in the context of this afterlife issue, which is, if you believe in a just God, how could you not believe in a world to come where the good receive benefits and the evil are punished?
Look, the challenge here is everyone has great clarity in the God they don't believe in. And I don't believe in that God either. Right? So,
Well, what's God? So how do you tell us how you understand gratuitous misfortune visited upon the innocent.
Like being in a debate like this.
Oh. My condolences.
Not forgiven. So, look, this is a talk I give to first-year rabbinical students in congregations all over the country. It is a medieval mistake based on Aristotelian thought that God has to be a simple, unmoved mover, and thereby eternal, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. Right? Those are terms that don't exist in biblical or in rabbinic Hebrew. So I apologize for the way the philosophers kidnapped the traditions, but it's not in the Torah. There is no Hebrew word for omnipotent, meaning all-powerful, and the concept is a nonsense concept.
So you're saying God doesn't have the power to change these things?
Yes, of course that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that what God has is a different kind of power than the power of the dictator that Christopher Hitchens and I both despise. And that what I look to God to be is a persuasive power, more comparable to a teacher or a lover or a parent who teaches and inspires you to be the best by seeing your potential and by giving you the vision and the power to rise to it. But I don't believe in a God who breaks the rules or who can intervene or who can do magic. And the challenge here, wait, I want to may I just say one more thing before you leap on me?
Sure.
It is the 125th anniversary of the birthday of Alfred North Whitehead, my Rebbe. And so in his honor, I tell you the following Hasidic story. The story is told of the Kutzker Rebbe, one of the great masters of the Hasidic tradition, who, walking past someone's home, sees that they're so impoverished they don't have the capacity to have a Shabbat meal. And so he prays for her to have a Shabbat meal magically bestowed upon her. I mean this only metaphorically. And no actual chassid involved in the story itself. So he prays that she should have this miraculous Shabbat dinner given to her, and she does, and he hears a vision which says, because you've intervened in the affairs of this world, you've lost your place in the world to come. And he starts to dance. And he says, when his students question him, he says, for the first time, I'm able to serve God without expectation of reward. That's in mainstream rabbinic tradition. So often I had this sense that what's being criticized is a kind of ignorant abuse of religious nuance, and we certainly know anyone who's been in an airport has read self-help books that claim to use scientific findings to justify all kinds of stupidities, which I don't think you can hold science responsible for, even though probably numerically there are far more people who have nonsense ideas based on false science as they do in religion. The challenge here is you say it's man-made, and I agree. It is man-made, as is medicine, as is law, but the solution to bad medicine and bad law is not to get rid of it. The solution is to have open discussions and continue to refine it and surpass it. Christopher.
What Sam Harris is exposing is how religion constantly shifts its claims to avoid being proven wrong. First, God is all-powerful and in control. Then suffering shows up, and suddenly God doesn't intervene, or is just a guiding force. That's not truth. That's moving the goalposts. The rabbi tries to escape the problem by weakening God. But that creates a bigger contradiction. If God can't stop suffering, then he's not all-powerful. If he can but chooses not to, then he's not good. You can't have both. And the scale of suffering matters. Around 5 million children under age 5 die every year from largely preventable causes, things like pneumonia, diarrhea, and lack of clean water. That's not human free will. Even the Bible undercuts the idea of a controlled, just system. Ecclesiastes 8:14 admits that the righteous get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked get what the righteous deserve.
This is not my fault.
Just hold the mic. Hold the mic. Yeah. Okay.
There's a comparable story I was told about the death of I think it was a Roman Catholic priest, but it could be any Christian official, really, who gets to St. Peter's Gate and is told, well, you're well done, thou good and faithful servant. Here's your place we've been preparing for you in paradise. And he says to St. Peter, but I see that there's terrible suffering and deprivation and misery among the souls in hell. Surely my place is with them, ministering to them. And he's told, you really don't get it, do you? One of the reasons why I like doing this, some people say sometimes, don't I ever get tired of debating with the religious? No, absolutely I don't, because you never know what they're going to say next. Sam and I don't mind being called predictable. It's very easy. We know what we think. We say straight out where we think we know, and where we think it's not possible to know, why we don't think there's a supernatural, and so on. But this evening already we've had, your suggestion that God is only really a guru, a friend when you're in need. I mean, he wouldn't do anything like bugger around with Job to prove a point. And which, if I now tell you, well, that must mean that that book is not the Word of God, you'd say, well, whoever believed that ever was the Word of God? Let me just tell you something. For hundreds and thousands of years, this kind of discussion would have been in most places impossible to have, or Sam and I would have been having it at the risk of our lives. Religion now comes to us in this smiley face, ingratiating way, because it's had to give so much ground, and because we know so much more. But you've no right to forget the way it behaved when it was strong, and when it really did believe that it had God on its side.
I'll rest with what Nabokov has John Shade say in Pale Fire. He says, life is such a surprise, why should death be any less of one?
No, it's very attractive as well as clever what David is trying to do. Saying that it's very attractive as well as very clever what David's trying to do. He's saying
you could stop there.
That the most, saying that it's those of us who doubt the supernatural who have the failure of imagination. And good move. But there's no one who can't play this game. There could be an afterlife and no God. Why not? There could be many gods and no afterlife. There could be a God with a sense of humor where good people went to hell and evil people and evil people carried on as in his initial creation, ruling the roost. I'm willing to imagine, as Princess Leia says in Star Wars. I can quote literature and scripture too. She wants to borrow Harrison's starship, and he's reluctant, and her envoy says, she's prepared to offer you more money than you can imagine. And he says, well, I can imagine quite a lot. I can imagine quite a lot too, but here's what we're meant to discuss, I think. Those who have claimed to know in advance the rules of reward and punishment, and the actual details of the afterlife, people who actually have and continue to rule the mental lives of millions of people, who have to explain away things, like Sam's 9 million dead children, by saying, well, what happens to their souls? St. Augustine has to come up with an answer. He says they go to limbo. At least if they're not baptized Catholic, that's where they go. So millions of people for hundreds of years thought that's where their children were. A terrible form of sadism and mental serfdom that the church is now considering dropping. But that limbo was really real to people when it was imagined for them by a sadistic North African pseudo-intellectual. So it's not a failure of imagination to say that this use of imagination is perverse. Neither Sam nor I have said it's impossible that there be a post-life existence. We've just said that it's not knowable, not that it's not known. So surely the default position must be that it's those who have ever said that resurrection or an afterlife is a dogma who have the explaining to do. For myself, I'm very open to that. I like surprises.
Brad.
I find myself once again agreeing with everything that Christopher Hitchens said, except
you thought I was clever too?
Except for 1%.
Except for 1%.
And for me, the main reason for an afterlife is frankly not to bring justice about in this world, but I won't have time in this lifetime to read as much as David Wolpe. And I would like to read some of the references that he's able to spit out all the time in such a learned way. Look, you talk about being at a cafeteria, and it does feel to me like we're using a stacked deck. So what religion says in the 2nd century is grist for the mill, and what science said in the 2nd century is, of course, outmoded. And so chronologically, there's this monolith called religion, and then science is only responsible for right now. But even right now, there are credible physicists who are teaching in universities who teach this theory of multiverse, and there are people like Sean Carroll at Cal Poly who say that's not science. You can't prove it, you can't disprove it, so that's nonsense masquerading as science. You can't prove or disprove dark matter or dark energy, but it does make the theory work, right? You can't get quantum gravity to fit with relativity, but they work in their own. So the challenge here is it's a violation, I think, of accuracy to claim that what science does is only affirm what is verifiable or falsifiable. Much of science does that, and it's a very important corrective tool, as I believe it is in most religion today, which is you make a claim, you put it out there, you argue about it, you debate it. But it's not as though these are in opposite camps. So the last thing I want to just state a dissent from is I don't believe that it's that religion lost because science won, because many of the people who have given us the Enlightenment and science were themselves motivated by a desire to read God's text, which is the world. So is there a lot of nonsense that is proposed in the name of religion? For sure. Is it egregious? Absolutely. Every criticism you've made, I think, is despicable and accurate and dead on. But that doesn't taint religion as a whole any more than the notion that you can measure people's craniums and look at their racial feature and then put up a hierarchy of human mattering, which was tenured at Harvard University within the past century, discredits science as a whole. There is every human enterprise that is capable of egregious mistake and of brilliant insight. The last thing I want to say, really the last thing for now, is if you insist on reading Shakespeare literally, then he also would be a dunce, but you would have missed his greatness. And some of the greatest literature in the world, billions of people have thought, were religious literature. I find very inspiring much of religious literature, and I find deeply offensive much of religious literature. But it's literature made by people to make sense of the world and to chart lives of meaning and of value. I think that's good.
Does this bloody work? Okay, at least it obscures my face if it doesn't project my voice. I'd like to be the first to rush to the common ground that's just been offered us, which consists of a very large and quite long admission that religion is man-made, which is our point to begin with. Thank you.
And Hitchens just strips it down to something simple. Religion doesn't give answers, it keeps changing the story. 1 minute it's absolute truth, the next minute it's metaphor, symbolism. Interpret it however you want. That's not knowledge. That's guesswork dressed up as certainty. Look at the history. For centuries, people were told these doctrines were unquestionable. Challenge them, and you could be punished or killed. That's not ancient history, that's documented fact. The Spanish Inquisition, executions for heresy, suppression of dissent. Religion didn't come in soft and friendly. It adapted because it had to. And then there's the cruelty built into the beliefs themselves. Hitchens brings up limbo, an idea pushed by Augustine of Hippo, where unbaptized infants were believed to go. Millions of parents were told their children were stuck in some eternal holding place. No evidence, no proof. Just authority making claims about the afterlife and controlling how people think and grieve. And here's the core point. No one is saying an afterlife is impossible. The point is, no one knows. There is zero verifiable evidence. Neuroscience shows consciousness is tied to brain activity. When the brain shuts down, consciousness ends. That's what the data shows. So the burden isn't on skeptics, it's on those making the claims. If you say there's a heaven, hell, judgment, rules, prove it. Otherwise, it's imagination being sold as truth. So what do you think? Does any of this actually prove there's an afterlife? Or are these just beliefs people hold on to because they want it to be true? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear where you stand on this. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, go check it out. It sets up everything we talked about here. And if you want us to break down the rest of this full conversation, let us know in the comments too. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.